All right, let's talk about the financial playbook of the ultra wealthy. We're going to pull back the curtain today. And this isn't really about earning more money. No, it's about a totally different way of thinking about wealth, about taxes, and about what you leave behind. So let's just dive right in.
This quote just nails it, doesn't it? It perfectly captures that feeling that there's a hidden set of rules for money, a system that wasn't designed for people who work for a living, but was built from the ground up to reward people who own things. And seriously, once you see how it works, you can never unsee it.
Okay, so at the heart of all this are two completely different financial games being played. On one side, you've got the workers, people who earn a salary. And on the other side, you have the owners who collect assets. Their path to building wealth, they're not just different, they are literally polar opposites.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. The worker's path is so simple, right? It's linear, you earn your money, you get taxed on it right away, and then you spend whatever's left over. But the owner's path, it's a cycle. You buy an asset, you borrow against its growth, tax-free by the way, and then you use that money to live your life and buy even more assets, all while that original investment just keeps growing.
And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. This is real life. When Warren Buffett says his tax rate is lower than his secretary's, it's because he's playing the owner's game. His wealth isn't from a salary, it's from his assets going up in value. And those gains are taxed at a much, much lower rate than a regular paycheck. It's a system that creates some pretty shocking situations. So how exactly do they pull this off? Well, the core strategy, the real secret sauce, can be boiled down to three simple but incredibly powerful words: buy, borrow, die. This is the framework. This is what lets them fund their lifestyles, grow their empires, and pass on fortunes, all while paying next to nothing in tax.
Let's break that down real quick. First, you buy. You buy assets that are designed to grow in value. We're talking stocks, real estate, whole companies. Second, instead of selling those things to get cash, you borrow against them. And finally, the last step is die. And when you do, a wild loophole lets that wealth transfer to your heirs almost completely tax-free. You know, this is the reason so many billionaire founders, think Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg, famously take a symbolic $1 salary. Why? Because they don't need income. Income is taxed. Their real wealth, the stuff that matters, comes from their assets growing in value, and that is not.
And here's the key concept you have to understand: unrealized gains. It's simple, really. If you own a stock and it goes up by $1 million, you don't owe a penny of tax on that $1 million unless you sell the stock. The ultra-wealthy are sitting on an estimated $8.5 trillion in these untaxed gains, and their entire strategy is built around one simple rule: never sell. So you're probably thinking, if you never sell, how do you get cash to live on? Well, this is the genius of the borrow step. See, a loan is considered debt, not income, so the IRS can't tax it. Billionaires can literally walk into a bank, use their massive stock portfolio as collateral, and walk out with millions in cash, completely tax-free. And they have specific tools in their toolbox for this. For a stock portfolio, they'll use something called a securities-backed line of credit, or an SBLOC. For real estate, it's a HELOC. This lets them keep their assets in the market, growing, while they use borrowed money to fund their lives, or, you guessed it, buy even more assets. It's kind of like double-dipping your capital. And that brings us to the final, and maybe the most powerful step of all: die. Okay, check this out. Let's say you bought a stock for $10, and it's worth $1,000 when you pass away. Your kid inherits it. For tax purposes, it's as if they bought it for $1,000. So they can sell it the very next day for $1,000 and pay zero capital gains tax. All that growth that happened over your entire lifetime, poof, it's wiped clean in the eyes of the IRS. Now you might be thinking, wait, what about the estate tax? Ah, yes, there is one final threat. But of course, the wealthy have a very sophisticated defense system for that too. It's basically a fortress built out of legal structures, all designed to make their wealth invisible to the taxman. And this is the guiding principle behind the whole thing: asset protection. The goal is to separate personal ownership from control. The logic is simple. If you don't legally own something, it can't be taxed as part of your personal estate when you die.
And the reason they go to such incredible lengths is this number right here. In the US, any estate valued over about $13.6 million gets slammed with a brutal 40% tax. That tax could literally cut a family's fortune in half in a single generation if they don't plan for it.
So the first layer of defense is the fortress, an irrevocable trust.
When you move your assets into one of these, you are legally giving up ownership of them. The assets don't belong to you anymore. They belong to the trust. That immediately shields them from that 40% estate tax.
Oh, but it gets deeper. The trust usually doesn't own the assets directly. No. Instead, the trust owns a shell company, a holding company, often registered somewhere like the Cayman Islands. This company is just a legal entity on paper, a vault designed to do one thing: own the wealth.
And finally, that shell company, that's what legally owns the treasure, the mansion, the yacht, the private jet. So what's the end result? The individual controls everything, but legally owns nothing. The entire structure is built so that, on paper, there's nothing for the government to tax.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. This all seems completely out of reach for most people, right? Billionaire stuff. But there is an entry point. There's a way for everyday people to start using these exact same owner principles to build their own little perpetual wealth machine.
The whole strategy is about flipping the script. What if you could take the money you were about to send to the IRS and completely legally, by the way, redirect it into an asset that builds your wealth instead? That's the whole idea behind the Zero Tax Snowball. Let me show you how this works with a short-term rental. Imagine you make $100,000 a year at your job. Then you go out and buy a rental property. Now, there's a powerful tax incentive called bonus depreciation that lets you claim a huge chunk of the property's cost as an upfront expense in year one. This creates what's called a paper loss. It's not a real cash loss, just a loss for tax purposes. Let's say it's $125 grand. Well, if you actively manage that rental, you can apply that paper loss directly against your salary, completely wiping out your taxable income. And just like that, your $20,000 tax bill, it's gone.
And that $20,000 that you just legally kept from the IRS, that becomes your seed capital. You use it as a down payment on the next property, which generates its own cash flow and its own tax deductions. You see what's happening? You've now officially started your own version of the buy, grow, and borrow cycle. You've started your very own Zero Tax Snowball.
So as we start to wrap this up, it's pretty clear these strategies are incredibly powerful. But, they all point to a much deeper question, a question about purpose and legacy.
This quote really gets to the core of why this whole hidden financial system even exists. It's not just about getting rich. It's about protecting what you've built, protecting it from being eaten away by taxes or lost in a single generation. At the end of the day, it's about preservation.
And that's really the final thought I want to leave you with. These tools, from trusts to tax strategies, they aren't just loopholes, they're shields. And they force you to ask yourself a very important question. What am I building in my life, for my family, for my future, that is so valuable it deserves to be protected?